man who needs no introduction, Preston Manning. Try to help me with this section of the bag.
Well, I guess one of the things we're supposed to talk about is our passion, and most of you know my passion, at least the last 15 years, has been democratic politics. And I put the emphasis on democracy. The thing I get the biggest thrill out of in political activities is just simply the chance to get a crowd of people between 500 and 1,500 people that I know something about, and an opportunity to try to convince them to unite behind a particular course of action. And our political process gives us lots of chances to do that, and it's been a great thrill for me. As most of you know, 15 years ago, a small group of us in Western Canada wanted to change the national political agenda, and we used the tools that are available to every Canadian in our democracy: freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of political action, freedom to contest elections. And we chose to use a new political party. That's a device that's used particularly in the West and in Quebec. And in 10 years, we managed to get official opposition in the Parliament. And then it was said that we weren't big enough and broad enough to go any further, so we tried to change it again and created another party, a Canadian Alliance, which is the official opposition. We haven't got to government, but that's been part of my experience. And we were successful in changing the national agenda, not anywhere near the extent that we would have liked to, but particularly on the fiscal front, we made some changes. The one area where we had the least success was in the area of democratic reforms. When I started out, one of the main things that I wanted to accomplish was make our democratic institutions work better, particularly the Parliament of Canada. So the idea that I'd like to talk to you about today is more on the idea of democratic reform. And I used to, when I was first elected, I went to I'd work late in the center block, and on occasion I'd go down to the House late at night, ostensibly to pick up something I'd left in my desk there, and the guards had let me in. And I'd sit in the chamber, like at night after everybody's gone. It's dimly lit and it's quiet. And for some reason, I could envision what that place could be a lot easier than I could when I was sitting there as a member, or even if I was talking. And I tried to develop in my own mind a vision of what could a genuinely democratic, senior political institution like the Parliament of Canada, and particularly the House of Commons, be like. And the idea came to me, I can't remember when, perhaps after about the 90th time that one of our motions to reform something had been voted down. We had absolutely no success on dozens and dozens and dozens of simple proposals for change, everything from strengthening committees to reducing the party discipline to how to handle private members' bills. But it occurred to me, and particularly towards the latter part of my time in Parliament, why don't we create a virtual Parliament on the internet? And one that has the features of an ideal democratic institution, perhaps one that people could participate in, and one that could, if we did it right, would maybe shame the existing Parliament or legislatures into some of those changes. So that's really the idea I want to lay before you. Why not a virtual Parliament on the internet? And if we can get maybe one or two of those slides there, Jack, it'll just... this is not the interactive version I have in mind, but it's a sort of a storyboard that'll give you... we would have to have an internet site. Somebody suggested Democracy Canada. That's some people said that's an oxymoron. But... and after hearing some of the earlier presentations, I think maybe perhaps the beaver should be added to this. I used to have a speech on the beaver as the founding rodent because, as you know, our country is one country that was formed as a result of a relentless pursuit of a rodent, which was the... but then I went to Ottawa. They said I had to have the two founding rodents, and we got the muskrat and the beaver, and the analogy was starting to get me into trouble, so I abandoned that. But we would start with a classy internet site that people would come to that are interested in democracy. And the next one then would be you'd arrive at a virtual building. Now this is sort of just a classical type of structure, but perhaps the thing to do would be to have a contest among some of our architects. If you were designing a 21st century institution, a building that institutionalizes democracy, what would it look like? Maybe it'd look quite different than this, but we would have to sell advertising on this as well. Of course, to pay for it, you'll notice that City TV has been given a slight, watch that, Moses. The next one then, when you arrive at this virtual building, you then have a number of venues and activities that you could participate in. And the aim is participation, not just visitation. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You know, I don't think people that talk about democracy and never do it are Democrats at all. And one of the problems in this country, I think, is there's way too much talk about democracy and not enough people doing it. You know, and so this would be a doing place. But some of the choices might be there'd be an information center if you want to get information on the issue of the day. Maybe you'd have the issue of the day or the issue of the week. You could go to the library, the information center. There'd be a media gallery where you could go and get the clips for what the media is saying on the various issues at the time. You might have a lobby in the classic sense. The lobby was the place where the lobbyists met the parliamentarians to try to persuade them. So you let the interest groups, I'm not opposed to interest groups. I think they play a constructive role. The challenge is to balance them and to calibrate them. So you have a lobby and you get the interest groups to sign up and have a place there. You want to hear what the Greenpeace has to say about Kyoto, come to the lobby. You want to hear what the Canadian Petroleum Association has, you have them there, and you could probably get the one if you could get the other, because they wouldn't want to leave it to the other side. Cafeteria, perhaps just an informal place where people could meet and talk and chat. Committee rooms, you could have a committee room where you could engage in issue campaigns. I'm a great believer in issue campaigns where you pick an issue, you go out and try, and in this country, if you can convince 2 million people to support a particular position, a pragmatic government will implement that no matter what their philosophy is. Or perhaps in the committee rooms you go through legislation. I, on my personal website, experimented with putting a bill on the website, breaking it up into digestible chunks so people they could either get an overview and express some general opinion on it, or if they were an expert, they could go through it. On that reproductive bill that's in the Parliament now, I think I could have got, if I'd used this technique, in 6 weeks, I could have brought more scientific and ethicist opinion to bear on that bill than the committee that looked at it did in a year, because people wouldn't have to track off to Ottawa for a 15-minute presentation to the Parliament. And so you'd have these venues and these activities. And I was very interested in some of the earlier presentations today because of when you think of what some of the technology could do to make this exciting, to almost make it a game, particularly for kids, because that seems to be the way to get them in. And then the key chamber would still be, if we can go to the next one there, Jack, would be the assembly. You'd have the assembly of some sort. And you know, this would be, in a sense, like a chat room, but it could be organized in such a way where there could be real interaction, debate, experts, voting, and try to bring the opinions of large numbers of people to bear on assessing some issue or program. Now, if one was designing this more ideal parliament, I think there'd be some characteristics to it that do not exist in the current parliament. And one of the first would be freedom of speech. We don't have real freedom of speech in our parliament. There are taboos against certain things. When we first got there, you couldn't talk about the Senate in the lower chamber. We got ruled out of order 50, 60 times, particularly if you didn't speak about it in a respectful way. Worse than that, the talk that was given to us this morning on the relation of Islam and the Islamic faith to some of the issues that are facing the world today, that speech could not be given in our parliament. Not because of any rules preventing it, but because of the taboo. I've asked one Hindu MP that we had in our caucus, I've asked Sikh MP, I've asked Muslim MP, why don't you ever talk about your faith perspective in relation to what's going on here, on either the moral and ethical issues or since September 11th, on that issue. And you know what they say to you? They say, we notice that if someone from a Christian perspective even tries to raise it here, the taboo against mixing faith and politics is so strong that they'll get ridiculed off the stage by the media, and they'll probably get a note from their whip saying, don't talk, you're going to get us into a mess. And so they say, well, if the dominant historic faith in the country, you can't talk about that, what chance would we have as a minority of expressing our most deeply held? So if we're going to have a parliament where we talk about, I think freedom of speech ought to be a characteristic. A second characteristic would be helpful, would be freedom of voting. As you know, in our parliament is one of the most disciplined parliaments in the British parliamentary system. The party discipline is stronger than in Westminster and in most of the other parliaments. So simply freedom of voting. And one of the things that we've noticed in the parliament, when people are free, like our parliament, there is some relaxation of the rules on private members' bills. And so when members have to make up their mind, then the debate that's going on actually takes on some relevance, because it's not just if someone can actually change their mind as a result of something that's being said, then it makes the debate more meaningful. And to tell you how bad it is in our parliament, the last vote I participated in was in December of 2001, was before Christmas, trying to cram stuff through. All the members are sick of the parliament, want to go home. And it was 9 or 10 o'clock at night, the bells ring, you trudge down to the house, sit at the thing, look at each member, the whip's office usually gives you a list of what you're voting on. The first motion was a supply, voting supply for a $6 billion supply motion, voting taxpayers' money to support the government. I'll bet you 95% of the members of the House didn't even know how much it was for, because if it's not on your sheet, it's just supply. The government's for it, the opposition's against it. Not a flicker of interest when this $6 billion thing floats through the parliament. But the next item was a private member's motion requesting the federal government to explain why it had reduced the strychnine level in gopher poison from 5% to 3%. This was the gopher bill. This was a private, you could sense a quickening in the House of interest in it. It was one of our prairie members that had something on about gophers. But it was a standing vote. I mean, these are important subjects, and it's important that every member stand and be counted. It was clear that this member had actually worked on some Ontario members, and some Ontario Liberals were actually voting for this opposition motion. And the House, the interest is quickening as government members are standing up. The Francophones, Anglophones, Federalists, Separatists, Socialists, Conservatives are united on the gopher bill. And the thing actually passed. Members cheer, throw their papers in the air. They stumble over their desk to clap this member on the back for, and I voted for the gopher bill. But I was sitting there and said, what kind of a place is this? When a $6 billion supply bill for taxpayers' money goes through without a flicker, with 90% of the members not even knowing what it is, but the gopher bill. So it's important to have freedom of voting. Maybe a couple of other features. I think if you had this site properly set up, you could bring scientific opinion to bear on some of the issues where we desperately need it. We have no real way of bringing science to bear on the big issues where science has a lot to say. Kyoto's a good example. The debate in our House on Kyoto 5 years ago, the take note debate was a disgrace on all sides of the House. The members not knowing enough about the science or being able to even judge the science that had been presented in committee. I actually suggested that the pages replace the members for the vote, because we probably, because they're young people that are more in tune with science than a lot of us. I think you could use this site to, perhaps once in a while, our parliament should debate ideas. Like, wouldn't it be magnificent if this kind of a thing, where some of the big ideas that are necessary to the future were actually discussed and debated there, One subject in that regard, I was very interested in the presentation earlier today about the ways of presenting three-dimensional representations of proteins and genetic material. Our politics, a lot of it is discussed in a single dimension. This business and the media are the worst at it, and politicians are second worst, of trying to describe everything in terms of left, right, center. Like that's a flat earth model. It's a unidimensional model for trying to discuss a three-dimensional world. I'd like to really sometimes see a debate in the Parliament, what are the other dimensions besides left, right, center? But the whole idea of bringing ideas to bear and having ideas debated, I think you could at least do it in this fashion. Perhaps one other feature to this this model virtual parliament would be a trap door under each member's seat, where if enough people have listened long enough and enough people push the button, the trap door, and they go down into the bowels of the building where they have to read the millions of petitions that are stored there that have never been read, which is what is in the basement of our Senate block. Anyway, that is my idea, and if anyone's interested in helping bring that into reality, I'd be very interested in talking to them. And just one last thing then, on the subject of democracy. Within the parties, whenever you start talking about democratic reform or democracy, or often at forums and conferences, in North America particularly, we get just consumed with the process. Like to us, because the raison d'etre for democracy is so far back, all our discussions about them, their views deserve to be brought to bear on the big decisions that affect them, not just the selection of their leaders, but the big decisions that affect them. And if we could design an institution that would do that, and processes that would do that, we're working with a big and a fundamental idea. So that's my idea, and I welcome the opportunity to share.